The ocean has always been a source of life, trade, and wonder, but hidden beneath its shimmering surface lies a darker history, one written in waves tall as mountains and cities swallowed whole. Picture this, a thriving ancient port, alive with the sounds of merchants haggling, children laughing, ships creaking against the docks. Then, without warning, the sea pulls back, exposing secrets it should never reveal. A hush falls, and then it comes, a wall of water, racing toward the shore with the force of 1,000 storms, crashing down with enough power to erase every trace of the world you knew. This isn't just a scene from a disaster movie. This happened over and over again across millennia. Tsunamis have rewritten human history in moments, burying civilizations beneath layers of sand and salt water, leaving behind only fragments for us to piece together. Today, we're diving into the mysteries of these ancient tsunamis catastrophes so immense they reshaped coastlines, toppled empires, and slipped into legend. Some were so devastating they became the stuff of myth, like the great flood stories passed down through generations. Others left behind silent witnesses, strange layers of sediment, scattered boulders the size of houses, or the eerie ruins of cities abandoned overnight. What can these clues tell us about the forces that destroyed them? And what lessons do they hold for us today, in a world where rising seas and shifting climates make these ancient disasters feel eerily relevant? From the sunken streets of a once great trading hub to the geological fingerprints of waves that traveled continents, we'll uncover how science and history collide to reveal the truth behind these lost cities. This isn't just a journey into the past, it's a reminder of how fragile human achievements can be in the face of nature's raw power. So join me as we trace the footsteps of tsunamis that vanished entire cultures and discover what they left behind in their wake. The answers might just change how you see the ocean and the future it holds. To understand how tsunamis could erase entire cities from history, we need to look beneath the ocean's surface literally. The Earth's crust isn't one solid shell. It's a puzzle of tectonic plates constantly shifting, grinding, or colliding. When these plates suddenly slip, especially along subduction zones where one plate dives beneath another, the seafloor can lurch upward or drop in seconds. That movement displaces trillions of gallons of water, creating a ripple effect that transforms into a tsunami. But here's what makes these waves so devastating. In deep water, they're barely noticeable, sometimes just a foot high but stretching hundreds of miles from crest to crest. It's only when they hit shallow coastal shelves that all that pent-up energy rears up into walls of water towering over 100 feet tall, moving faster than a speeding car. Ancient civilizations had no warning systems, no seismic sensors, just the horrifying sight of the ocean retreating before the wave struck, and the damage didn't stop at the shoreline. Tsunamis don't just flood, they scour. They drag boulders inland, bury streets under layers of sand and shell, and leave behind geological fingerprints that scientists now use like detective clues. Take the case of the Mediterranean tsunami triggered by the eruption of Thera around 1600 BC. Sediment cores drilled from coastal marshes reveal chaotic layers of marine debris mixed with pottery shards, evidence of a wave so powerful it smashed through Bronze Age towns on Crete and left deposits miles inland. Modern researchers even track megaripples, gigantic underwater sand dunes shaped by tsunamis, or study boulders the size of trucks mysteriously stranded far from shore. These silent witnesses help reconstruct ancient disasters, revealing waves that might have inspired flood myths like Noah's Ark or Atlantis. And with climate change raising sea levels today, these old catastrophes hold urgent lessons. Because when the ocean decides to rewrite history, it doesn't ask permission. It just leaves us to piece together the aftermath. Detecting the echoes of ancient tsunamis is like piecing together a planetary crime scene where the ocean itself is both the culprit and the witness. Scientists become time travelers, sifting through layers of Earth for clues most people would walk right past. Take those unassuming sediment cores pulled from coastal marshes and seabeds. At first glance, they're just tubes of mud, but slice one open, and you might find a stark line where calm, orderly layers of silt suddenly give way to chaos. Chunks of coral, smashed seashells, even flecks of volcanic ash, all dumped in a single catastrophic event. These aren't just layers of dirt, they're pages from a disaster journal, written in sand and salt. Then there are the boulders. Imagine standing in a field miles from the shore, staring at a rock the size of a minivan, resting atop cliffs or wedged into valleys where no river could have carried it. These aren't glacial leftovers or ancient monuments, they're tsunami trademarks, flung inland by waves with enough force to toss them like pebbles. In Crete, geologists found limestone blocks weighing over 40 tons perched high above sea level, perfectly matched to coastal cliffs now half a mile away. The math is terrifying. Moving them would have required waves surging at highway speeds, but the most haunting evidence often lies in ruins themselves. In the Mediterranean, archaeologists excavating the Bronze Age city of Palicastro discovered something bizarre. An entire neighborhood buried under 9 feet of sea-rounded gravel, packed with marine shells and pottery shards all facing the same direction, as if sorted by a furious current. Walls were toppled in unison, their stones scattered like dominoes. This wasn't gradual erosion or a slow flood. This was the ocean rearranging a city in minutes. Now cross that geological detective work with human stories, and the picture becomes even clearer. When researchers compared sediment cores from Turkey's coast with ancient Hittite tablets describing the sea swallowing the land, the dates aligned perfectly with a massive tsunami around 1280 BC. Even Homer's Odyssey might hold clues. His description of a wave higher than 2 men destroying a coastal fortress matches the geological scars found near Troy. It's eerie how often science and myth point to the same catastrophes, as if these events were so traumatic, civilizations couldn't help but turn them into legends. And that brings us to Thera, a volcanic island whose eruption around 1600 BC may have birthed the Atlantis myth. When its caldera collapsed, it didn't just bury the Minoan settlement of Akrotiri under ash, it triggered tsunamis that radiated across the Aegean. Core samples from Crete show a sudden layer of volcanic pumice mixed with deep-sea sediments, proof that waves dragged ocean floor debris miles inland. The scale is almost unimaginable. Models suggest initial waves reached 190 feet tall, enough to overrun entire islands. No wonder Plato's story of an advanced civilization vanishing beneath the sea feels less like fiction and more like a distorted memory of a very real disaster. What's chilling is how these ancient tragedies mirror modern vulnerabilities. The same geological forces that erased Bronze Age ports still lurk beneath our coasts. We've just added cities, reactors, and millions of people to the flood zones. When scientists drill into Oregon's marshes and find evidence of 19 tsunamis in the last 10,000 years, each separated by quiet centuries, it's a reminder the ocean never forgets how to rewrite the shoreline. It's only a matter of time before it picks up the pen again. The explosion of Thera wasn't just a volcanic eruption. It was an earth-shattering event that rewrote the geography of the Mediterranean. Picture an island once thriving with Minoan settlements, suddenly torn apart by a force equivalent to 40 atomic bombs. The blast sent plumes of ash 20 miles high, darkening skies across the region, while pyroclastic flows raced down the slopes at speeds topping 150 miles per hour, vaporizing everything in their path. But the worst was yet to come. When the volcano's magma chamber collapsed, it created a caldera so vast that the sea rushed in to fill the void, displacing unimaginable volumes of water. In moments, the ocean recoiled, then surged outward in a series of tsunamis that radiated like ripples in a pond, growing taller and deadlier as they approached the shores of Crete and beyond. On Crete, the Minoans, Europe's first advanced civilization, had no idea what was coming. Their palaces, adorned with vibrant frescoes and intricate plumbing systems, stood no chance against the waves. Archaeologists digging at Amnisos, a key Minoan port, found buildings crushed by boulders the size of small houses, their walls knocked flat as if by a giant's fist. Further inland, layers of ash and pumice mixed with sea salt and shattered pottery tell a story of successive waves, each scouring the land clean. Even shipwrecks weren't spared. Vessels were hurled ashore like toys, their hulls splintered against cliffs now littered with marine debris. But here's where history blurs into myth. Plato's account of Atlantis, written over 1,000 years later, describes a sophisticated island kingdom that angered the gods and was swallowed by the sea in a single day and night of misfortune. The parallels are striking. A maritime power advanced beyond its time, vanishing beneath the waves after a cataclysmic event. Could Thera's destruction have been distorted into the Atlantis legend over centuries of retelling? Some scholars point to the Egyptian priest Plato, cited as his sources keepers of records that might have preserved memories of the Minoan collapse. Others argue Atlantis was pure allegory. Yet the physical evidence is hard to ignore. On Santorini, the modern remnant of Thera, excavations at Akrotiri reveal a city frozen in time, its multi-story buildings preserved under volcanic ash, their vivid frescoes still depicting dolphins and saffron gatherers, a snapshot of a civilization cut down in its prime. The debate may never be settled, but one thing is certain. The Thera eruption didn't just destroy an island, it sent shockwaves through history. Trade routes collapsed, climate patterns shifted from the ash veil, and the Minoans, already weakened, fell into decline. Their fate serves as a humbling reminder. Even the mightiest civilizations are no match for the planet's raw power. And as we scan the seafloor for more clues whether to prove Atlantis was real or simply to understand the past, we're left with a chilling thought. The same forces that reshaped the Bronze Age still simmer beneath our feet, waiting for their next moment to rewrite the story of humanity. The 12th century BC was a time of empires, glittering palaces, bustling ports, and trade networks stretching from Egypt to Mesopotamia. Then, almost overnight, it all fell apart. The Bronze Age collapse remains one of history's greatest mysteries, but one clue lies in the ruins of coastal cities like Ugarit, where archaeologists have uncovered streets choked with crushed pottery, shattered walls, and layers of sand filled with seashells, telltale signs of a tsunami's fury. This wasn't just one wave, but a cascade of disasters. Earthquakes toppling fortresses, fires raging through toppled cities, and then the sea itself rising up to finish the job. At Ugarit, a thriving hub of trade and diplomacy, clay tablets recovered from the ruins tell a haunting story. One letter, sent in desperation as the crisis unfolded, reads, "The enemy ships are already here, our cities are burned, the fields lie ruined." But who were these enemies? Historians point to the so-called Sea Peoples, a shadowy coalition of raiders who swept through the region at the same time. Some scholars believe they weren't just invaders but refugees, entire populations displaced by environmental catastrophes, including tsunamis that destroyed their homelands. Imagine fleets of desperate people fleeing drowned coasts only to clash with collapsing kingdoms already reeling from nature's wrath. The geological evidence adds weight to this theory. Along the eastern Mediterranean, sediment cores reveal sudden deposits of marine material miles inland, dated precisely to this chaotic period. In Turkey, researchers found a layer of tsunami debris sandwiched between the ruins of Hittite cities, suggesting waves surged upriver, drowning settlements far from the coast. Even Egypt wasn't spared. Inscriptions from the reign of Pharaoh Ramses III describe the sea conspiring to unleash chaos, with waves swallowing entire armies. What's chilling is how these disasters may have fed into one another. Earthquakes triggered tsunamis, which disrupted agriculture with saltwater floods, leading to famine, and famine invited invasion. It's a grim reminder of how interconnected human societies are with the environment. When the ground shakes and the sea rises, even the mightiest empires can crumble like sandcastles. Now, let's travel east to the Indian Ocean, where another ancient tsunami left behind a geological signature so massive it rewrote coastlines. Off the coast of Sumatra, scientists have uncovered evidence of a wave that struck nearly 3,000 years ago, its power dwarfing even the infamous 2004 tsunami. Coral boulders the size of trucks were flung onto cliffs over 60 feet high, while inland caves became time capsules, their floors layered with ocean sediment carried miles by the surge. These weren't just local events, they were global warnings written in stone and sand. The 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami was a wake-up call for the modern world, but for ancient civilizations along these shores, catastrophic waves were already woven into their collective memory. Tamil Sangam poetry, dating back 2,000 years, describes cities devoured by the sea, with survivors fleeing inland as the ocean growled like 1,000 tigers. These aren't just poetic metaphors. Along India's southeastern coast, geologists have uncovered sprawling layers of sand and shell deposits miles inland, sandwiched between ancient soil layers like pages in a disaster diary. One site near Mahabalipuram shows evidence of multiple tsunamis over millennia, with the oldest dating back nearly 5,000 years, waves so powerful they tossed boulders weighing 50 tons onto cliffs 30 feet above sea level. Then there's the mystery of the submerged temples. 7 pagodas once stood along this coastline, according to local law, but 6 now lie beneath the waves. When the 2004 tsunami briefly pulled back the ocean's curtain, fishermen reported glimpsing stone structures off the coast, a fleeting confirmation of stories passed down for generations. Marine archaeologists later mapped an entire complex of drowned ruins, their collapsed walls aligned with descriptions from medieval texts. The timing matches a catastrophic tsunami around 3000 BC, when sea levels were lower and these temples would have stood on dry land. It's as if the ocean itself preserved a warning. What has happened before will happen again. Japan took this lesson to heart centuries before modern seismology. Dotting its coastline are weathered stone tablets, some over 600 years old, inscribed with chilling messages. Do not build homes below this point, reads one in Enyoshi village, marking the uphill limit where an 1896 tsunami stopped. Others warn, hide dwellings ensure the peace and happiness of descendants. These tsunami stones, some standing 20 feet tall, were erected by survivors who understood that memories fade, but stone endures. The oldest date back to the Jogan tsunami of 869, which contemporary records describe as a black surge taller than the pines that drowned 1,000 villages. Modern excavations behind those stones reveal layers of saltwater-killed soil, proving their grim accuracy across 12 centuries. What makes these markers so remarkable is their precision. At Kameishi, a stone erected after the 1896 disaster advised fishermen to run uphill if an earthquake lasted unusually long, a prescient warning that saved lives in 2011 when residents heeded it despite having no visible wave. Others describe the eerie calm before the tsunami strikes, noting how the sea withdraws like a great breath held too long. This isn't just folklore, it's hard-won science encoded in poetry. When researchers compared the stone's warnings to geological evidence, they found exact matches like the Rungholt stone that marked an inundation zone later confirmed by sediment cores. The stones speak to something deeper than survival tactics. They represent a dialogue between generations, a plea to remember what the land cannot forget. Some stand in silent rebuke, like those in towns where developers ignored the warnings and built in the danger zone, only to see history repeat itself. Others have become pilgrimage sites where survivors of modern tsunamis leave offerings, acknowledging their debt to ancestors they'll never meet. In an age of satellites and sirens, these moss-covered monoliths remind us that technology is no substitute for wisdom, and that sometimes the past holds the key to our future. Now, let's turn to the Pacific Northwest, where cedar carvings and indigenous stories describe a night ocean that walked upon the land, a description that eerily matches geological evidence of a continent-shaking tsunami over 300 years ago. Japan's tsunami stones stand as silent sentinels against the sea's fury, their weathered surfaces etched with warnings carved in stone, literally. These aren't just markers, they're time capsules of survival, engraved with phrases like, "High dwellings bring peace to descendants," or "Remember the calamity of the great waves." One stone in Enyoshi, perched on a hillside, bears a chillingly simple command: do not build below this point. For 6 centuries, it marked the uphill boundary where an 1896 tsunami's devastation ended, a line the village respected so strictly that when the 2011 wave struck, every home above the stone survived untouched while those below vanished. But not all communities listened. In the same disaster, the city of Rungholt ignored its own ancestral warnings, expanding neighborhoods into low-lying areas that had been swamped by tsunamis in 1690 and 1896. The result, a 20-foot wave swallowed the entire downtown, leaving only a single pine tree standing where thousands once lived. The irony is crushing. Modern engineering had lulled them into a false sense of security, while 600-year-old stones in neighboring villages proved more reliable than concrete seawalls. What makes these markers extraordinary isn't just their foresight, it's their precision. Some describe the eerie prelude to disaster, noting how the sea recedes like a dragon drawing breath, a detail modern science confirms as a classic tsunami warning sign. Others, like the Jogan stone from 869, meticulously document wave heights and inundation zones that match geological sediment layers uncovered centuries later. These stones weren't erected by rulers or priests, but by survivors, fishermen and farmers who carved their trauma into granite, determined to spare future generations. Yet the stones also reveal a painful pattern civilizations forget. In Kameishi, a marker warned of an 1856 tsunami so severe it left no house standing. Yet by 2011, apartments and shops crowded the same fatal stretch of shore. After the wave hit, rescuers found the stone, still legible, buried under debris, as if the earth itself was echoing its ignored message. Today, some of these monoliths have become pilgrimage sites, where survivors of modern disasters leave offerings of sake and flowers, whispering apologies to ancestors whose wisdom was dismissed. This tension between memory and progress leads us to a haunting question. How many other ancient warnings lie buried beneath our cities or linger in forgotten texts? The Pacific Northwest's indigenous tribes spoke of a night ocean that walked, a phrase that baffled settlers until geologists uncovered evidence of a 30-foot tsunami in 1700, triggered by the same fault line that could rupture again tomorrow. From Japan's stones to Native American oral histories, these aren't just stories. They're alarms set by the past, still ringing faintly beneath the noise of the present. And somewhere beneath the waves, there's a city that never got to carve its warning into stone. Rungholt was no myth until the sea decided it should be. Nestled in the Wadden Sea off modern Germany's coast, this bustling medieval port thrived on trade, its wealth built on wool, salt, and the audacity to flourish where land met water. Then, on a January night in 1362, the Groot Mandrenk, the great drowning of men, struck. A storm surge of unimaginable force crashed through dikes, swallowing the city whole. Survivors spoke of waves higher than church steeples, of bells tolling underwater as the sea claimed streets, homes, and lives. Within hours, Rungholt vanished beneath the tides, leaving only whispers of its sins. Folklore claimed the city's downfall was divine punishment, a tale spun from drunken priests mocking communion with a donkey, or merchants so greedy they challenged God himself. But science tells a darker truth. A catastrophic storm tide, amplified by rising sea levels from the Little Ice Age, turned the North Sea into a weapon. For centuries, Rungholt existed only in ballads and marshland rumors until archaeologists began peeling back the mudflats. Using ground-penetrating radar, they mapped ghostly outlines of streets, the skeletal remains of wells, even the faint grid of a marketplace. In 2021, a team uncovered something chilling. A drainage system near the old coastline, its timbers shattered outward, as if struck by a wall of water. Nearby, they found pottery shards, coins minted in 1350, proof the city was thriving right up to its abrupt end. These discoveries confirmed what fishermen had reported for generations: the occasional clang of a dredger hitting submerged church bells, or low tides exposing the ribs of drowned houses. Rungholt's tragedy isn't just a medieval cautionary tale. It's a window into how tsunamis and storm surges rewrote trade networks overnight. Before its destruction, the city was a linchpin in the Hanseatic League's northern routes, a place where Flemish wool met Baltic grain. Its loss forced merchants to reroute inland, shifting economic power to safer harbors like Hamburg. Similar disruptions echo across history, when the Thera tsunami crippled Minoan trade, or when the 1700 Cascadia quake severed Native American coastal exchange networks. Each disaster left voids that reshaped economies for centuries. Today, Rungholt's legacy lingers in the Wadden Sea's shifting sands, where tides still reveal its bones for brief moments before hiding them again. It's a stark reminder that prosperity built on the coast is always on borrowed time, a lesson as urgent now as it was 7 centuries ago. Because while we've replaced wooden dikes with concrete barriers, the sea's appetite for cities hasn't dimmed. The next Groot Mandrenk isn't a question of if, but when. And somewhere beneath those mudflats, Rungholt's shattered wells whisper a warning we'd do well to hear. Pavlopetri wasn't just a city, it was a lifeline. Nestled off the southern coast of Greece over 5,000 years ago, this bustling port thrived as a nexus of Bronze Age trade, its docks teeming with ships laden with Cypriot copper, Egyptian gold, and spices from distant shores. Then, around 1000 BCE, the sea swallowed it whole. Today, its ruins lie just 15 feet underwater, preserved so perfectly that archaeologists have mapped its streets, courtyards, even its sewage system, all frozen in time beneath the waves. But what's chilling isn't just the city's fate, it's the ripple effect its destruction sent across the ancient world. When Pavlopetri vanished, the reverberations were immediate. Merchant vessels mid-voyage suddenly had nowhere to unload. Caravans waiting inland for goods that never arrived found their economies collapsing like dominoes. A single tsunami didn't just erase a city, it snipped a thread in the intricate web of Mediterranean trade. Shipwrecks from this period tell the story in haunting detail. Hulls packed with untouched cargo, their amphorae still sealed with wax, their copper ingots never reaching the smiths who depended on them. These weren't ships lost in storms, they were victims of a supply chain abruptly severed, left to drift until they sank. The collapse of ports like Pavlopetri didn't just disrupt commerce, it rewrote political alliances. Kings who relied on imported tin to make bronze the backbone of their armies suddenly found themselves powerless. Regions that exported olive oil or wine faced economic freefall when their trading partners disappeared overnight. It's no coincidence that the late Bronze Age collapse, one of history's most enigmatic downturns, coincides with geological evidence of multiple Mediterranean tsunamis. Coastal cities from Troy to Ugarit show layers of sea-borne debris stacked like grim bookmarks in their ruins. But here's the unsettling parallel: modern globalization is just as vulnerable. Picture a mega tsunami striking the Strait of Malacca today, a narrow shipping lane where 40% of global trade passes. The ports of Singapore and Kuala Lumpur could become the Pavlopetris of our era, their container ships stranded, their cargo rotting in dockside warehouses. Supply chains for everything from smartphones to medical supplies would snap. Unlike the Bronze Age, our world relies on just-in-time delivery. There are no stockpiles to cushion the blow. The past offers a stark lesson. Civilizations build their wealth on coastlines, but the sea never guarantees safe passage. Perhaps that's why so many flood myths endure, not just as morality tales, but as ancestral memories of real catastrophes. One such story may trace back to a tsunami that reshaped the eastern Mediterranean around 1600 BCE, an event so devastating it echoes in the biblical tale of the deluge. But that's a wave for another chapter. The Black Sea wasn't always the vast, brackish basin we know today 7,500 years ago. It was a freshwater lake, smaller and lower than the Mediterranean, cradled by thriving Neolithic villages along its gentle shores. Then, according to one controversial theory, the unimaginable happened. As glaciers melted and global sea levels rose, the Mediterranean's waters pressed against the natural dams separating it from the Black Sea, until one day the barrier gave way. What followed wasn't just a flood but a cataclysm. A deluge 200 times more powerful than Niagara Falls crashed through the Bosporus Strait, roaring inland at speeds that could outrun a galloping horse, swallowing an area the size of Florida in months. Coastal settlements vanished beneath a rising tide, their inhabitants fleeing as the shoreline advanced a mile a day. An event so traumatic, some scholars argue, it echoes in flood myths across cultures, from Noah's Ark to the Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh. Diving into the debate feels like stepping into an academic battleground. On one side, marine geologists point to sonar maps of the Black Sea floor, where ancient river channels lie drowned beneath hundreds of feet of water, their valleys abruptly cut off evidence of a landscape submerged in a geological blink. In 1999, explorers discovered a submerged shoreline 12 stories below the current coast, complete with shells dated to 5600 BC, their chemistry abruptly switching from freshwater to saltwater. Even more compelling are the drowned structures, stone tools, pottery shards, and the remains of wattle and daub houses found off Bulgaria's coast, their timbers preserved in oxygen-starved mud like ghostly blueprints of a vanished world. But skeptics counter that the flooding was slower, less apocalyptic, a gradual rise over centuries, not a biblical-scale disaster. They cite sediment cores showing a more nuanced transition, with periods of both saltwater and freshwater influence before the final takeover. Yet even they admit something dramatic reshaped this region. The truth might lie between extremes, a series of violent pulses, each worse than the last, as the Mediterranean gnawed through the crumbling land bridge. What's undeniable is how deeply this event, real or exaggerated, burned itself into human memory. The survivors wouldn't have known the mechanics of glacial melt or plate tectonics. They'd only know the water kept coming, swallowing fields, homes, and sacred sites. Imagine generations passing down the story, each retelling heightening the terror, until it became a warning etched into myth. The gods displeased, the ark built, the world reborn from the waves. Now let's cross the globe to the Solomon Islands, where elders still recount the night the ocean stood up and walked. Their stories, passed down for 3,000 years, describe villages vanishing beneath waves, details so precise, modern scientists have matched them to tsunami deposits buried beneath coconut groves. These aren't just tales, they're survival manuals written in the ink of collective trauma. Pacific Islanders didn't need seismographs or tide gauges to understand the ocean's wrath. They had something just as powerful, memory carved into story. Take the Hawaiian legend of Kaya Kahanalii, a wave so monstrous it drowned an entire coastal tribe. Elders described it as the sea, rising like a war god, swallowing homes and sacred fish ponds in a single surge. For generations, this wasn't just a tale, it was a survival guide, a warning etched into chants and dances. Then, in the 1970s, geologists drilling into Kauai's coast made a spine-chilling discovery: layers of coral and sand shoved inland, dating to the exact era the oral histories described. The science matched the story down to the decade. This pattern repeats across the Pacific. In the Solomon Islands, elders speak of the ocean standing up to dance, a phrase that led researchers to uncover tsunami deposits beneath village gardens. On Vanuatu, stories of fire under the sea, preceding great waves align perfectly with submarine landslide scars mapped by sonar. These aren't coincidences, they're proof of cultures honing disaster science through observation and oral tradition. Without a single written word, islanders preserved tsunami lore for centuries by weaving it into the fabric of daily life. Children learned it through songs about the hungry tide, fishermen through taboos against building too close to shore. What's extraordinary is how precise these accounts are. A Samoan legend describes survivors fleeing to a specific hilltop after seeing the sea boil without fire, a detail that matches both the thermal plumes of underwater volcanic eruptions and the elevated refuge later identified by geologists. Even the timing is preserved. Tongan genealogies recount a tsunami during the reign of a particular chief, a date later corroborated by radiocarbon-dated debris. This isn't just storytelling, it's data transmission across generations. Now contrast this with the Mediterranean's silent tsunami. While Pacific cultures shouted their warnings in song, the ancient city of Helike kept its secrets buried. One winter night in 373 BC, this prosperous Greek port vanished without a single survivor's tale. Historians wrote of a city swallowed by the sea, but for centuries, Helike's fate was chalked up to myth until archaeologists found its ruins not beneath waves, but under 20 feet of inland mud. The culprit, a tsunami triggered by a submarine landslide, its force amplified by the Gulf of Corinth's narrow geography. Unlike the Pacific's oral histories, Helike's story had to be dug up layer by layer, its lessons locked in silt instead of song. The difference is haunting. One culture remembered to survive, the other became a cautionary tale lost until science unearthed it. This duality reveals a profound truth about human resilience. When disaster strikes, survival isn't just about enduring the wave, it's about ensuring the warning outlasts the water. Helike wasn't just lost, it was erased with the precision of a divine hand. One winter night in 373 BC, this thriving Greek city, known as a hub of trade and a center of worship for Poseidon, simply ceased to exist. Ancient historians like Strabo describe the catastrophe in chilling detail. Earthquakes shattered the streets, then a titanic wave surged inland, dragging buildings and people into the sea. By dawn, nothing remained but a saltwater swamp. The devastation was so complete, survivors claimed Poseidon himself had uprooted his own temple, plunging his bronze statue beneath the waves as punishment for the city's arrogance. For centuries, Helike became a ghost story until 2001, when archaeologists probing the Gulf of Corinth's muddy flats struck stone. What they uncovered was a time capsule of disaster. Unlike Pompeii, frozen in volcanic ash, Helike's ruins were preserved in a thick layer of silt, its streets and foundations eerily intact. Here, a cobblestone road, still grooved by ancient cartwheels. There, the skeleton of a pottery workshop, its kilns filled with shattered vases fired moments before the wave hit. Most haunting of all, the absence of human remains. Just like Plato's Atlantis, the sea had taken everything, even the dead. The parallels don't stop there. Helike was a maritime power, rich from controlling trade routes, much like the legendary Atlantis. Its people were said to have angered the gods through hubris, echoing Plato's tale of a civilization punished for its corruption. Even the timeline fits. Plato wrote about Atlantis around 360 BC, barely a decade after Helike's destruction. Could his story have been a distorted retelling of a very real event? Some scholars point to his source, Egyptian priests who traded with Helike and may have preserved its fate in their records. Others argue the similarities are coincidental, that Atlantis was purely allegorical. But standing in Helike's waterlogged ruins, it's hard not to feel the weight of the connection. Now, let's turn from stone to art, because ancient artists left us another set of clues. On a broken Minoan fresco from Akrotiri, a fisherman carries his catch through a seaside town, unaware that the vibrant scene around him would soon be buried under volcanic ash. The walls of Egyptian tombs depict ships capsizing in freak waves, their crews tossed like dolls. Even Mesopotamian cylinder seals show zigzag lines beneath towering figures. Some interpret these as stylized tsunamis, the gods' weapons against mankind. These artworks aren't just decorations, they're encrypted warnings painted in the pigments of collective trauma. Take the famous flood tablet of the Epic of Gilgamesh, where the hero Utnapishtim builds an ark to survive a divine deluge. The description of the storm, the sea rose like a wall, matches tsunami eyewitness accounts with unsettling accuracy. Or consider the Aboriginal rock art of Australia's northwest, where red ochre figures flee from a massive wave curling above them, its crest dotted with spirit beings. Modern dating places these paintings around 7,000 years old, contemporary with the catastrophic flooding of the Sunda Shelf, when rising seas drowned an area twice the size of Texas. What's striking is how these artistic renditions cross cultures and continents, all circling the same primal fear. Whether painted on pottery or chiseled into temple walls, they capture the same moment, the heartbeat before the wave hits when the ocean reveals its teeth. For ancient civilizations living at the mercy of the sea, tsunamis weren't just disasters, they were conversations with the divine, moments when the gods spoke in torrents of salt water. And in their art, they left us the grammar to decode those messages. Tsunamis didn't just reshape coastlines, they carved themselves into the soul of civilizations, leaving scars on art and literature as deep as those on the land. In Japan, the Hamagyori scrolls from 1854 capture the moment a wave swallowed whole villages, their ink strokes trembling with urgency, as if the artist's brush feared the sea might surge again. One panel shows survivors clinging to rooftops, their faces twisted in horror as water engulfs a temple, not just a record of disaster, but a plea to remember. Half a world away, Roman historian Tacitus wrote of Britannia's coast being pummeled by waves like mountains, his words etching the terror of an event that likely sent refugees streaming inland. These accounts aren't just history, they're psychological portraits of societies grappling with the unimaginable. Then there's the eerie fresco from Akrotiri, the Minoan city buried by Thera's eruption. Beneath vibrant saffron gatherers and leaping dolphins, one section shows a shattered fleet, ships tossed like twigs against a cliffside. Archaeologists long assumed it depicted a naval battle until they noticed the waves. Their curling, claw-like forms match modern tsunami models too precisely for coincidence. Could this be a survivor's last testament, painted before ash sealed the city away? Even older clues surface in Babylonian cuneiform tablets, where the Epic of Gilgamesh describes a flood taller than the ziggurats, its waters churning like 1,000 storms. The description aligns with sediment layers found near ancient Ur, evidence of a catastrophic inundation around 2900 BC. What's haunting is how these records blend dread with reverence. Japanese tsunami scrolls often include prayers to appease sea kami, while Aztec codices depict waves as coiling serpents, both destroyers and divine messengers. This duality reveals a hard truth. For ancient peoples, tsunamis weren't just tragedies, they were encounters with the sublime, moments when the gods flexed their power. The Aboriginal Gunditjmara people of Australia tell of Budgebim, a volcano whose eruption triggered a tsunami so vast, it became woven into their dreamtime stories as a creator and destroyer. Their rock art shows the wave as a rainbow serpent, its arch both beautiful and deadly. Now consider the military tsunami, the disaster that altered the fate of nations. In 1281, Kublai Khan's Mongol fleet, the mightiest armada of its age, anchored off Japan's coast, poised to conquer the islands. Then the kamikaze, the divine wind, struck. Ancient texts describe a storm so fierce it birthed waves that swallowed ships whole, drowning 40,000 invaders. For centuries, historians credited typhoons alone until marine archaeologists found Mongol wrecks scattered miles inland, their hulls spiked with boulders only a tsunami could have carried. Nature didn't just defend Japan, it rewrote the balance of power in East Asia. One wave, one empire turned back, the ripple effects would last centuries. The morning of November 1st, 1755, began like any other All Saints' Day in Lisbon, church bells ringing, candles flickering in cathedrals packed with worshippers. Then at 9:40, the ground convulsed. Buildings swayed like reeds in a storm as a magnitude 8.5 earthquake tore through the city. Its tremors felt as far away as Finland. But the horror was just beginning. 20 minutes later, the sea withdrew with a sinister hiss, exposing shipwrecks and flopping fish. Then it returned, a wall of water 30 feet high, smashing through the marble arches of the Grand Praça do Comércio, lifting ships onto rooftops and drowning thousands who'd fled the quake only to meet the wave. By the time fires ignited by fallen candles finished their work, Lisbon lay in ruins, its golden age buried under 60,000 corpses. This wasn't just a tragedy, it was a turning point in history. For centuries, Europeans saw disasters as divine punishment, but Lisbon's devastation struck on a holy day, its churches crumbling atop the faithful. Philosophers like Voltaire seized on the irony. asking how a benevolent God could allow such indiscriminate suffering. His poem on the Lisbon disaster scorched the idea of divine justice, while Immanuel Kant published one of the first scientific analyses of earthquakes, arguing they were natural phenomena, not acts of wrath. The disaster became a catalyst for the Enlightenment, pushing Europe toward reason over dogma. The practical aftermath was just as transformative. Under the pragmatic Marquis of Pombal, Lisbon rose from the ashes as the world's first earthquake-resistant city. Engineers designed wider streets to prevent collapsing buildings from trapping crowds, and tested pombaline cages, flexible wooden skeletons inside masonry walls, by marching troops around scaled-down models to simulate tremors. Even the tsunami's behavior was meticulously documented, with priests noting how water surged upriver, a detail modern scientists now use to model flood risks. Yet the most haunting legacy lies in the questions Lisbon forces us to ask today. Seismologists warn the same fault line could unleash another megaquake, and Lisbon's modern skyline gleams with high rises built on reclaimed land prime targets for a repeat tsunami. Worse, the earthquake's fingerprints have been found as far as the Caribbean, where coral beds show the 1755 tsunami scraped the seafloor. It's a chilling reminder, disasters that feel regional can have global claws. Now, let's journey to a catastrophe lost to time until a team of archaeologists stumbled upon something extraordinary in the jungles of Indonesia. Beneath layers of volcanic ash and tangled roots, they found the remnants of a city frozen in its final moments, its streets strewn with skeletons mid-flight. This wasn't just Pompeii of the East, it was a civilization erased by a wave so powerful it left mountains of coral stranded inland, and its story might rewrite everything we know about ancient tsunamis. Beneath the turquoise waves off Java's western coast lies a mystery that defies time, a sprawling complex of stone walls, terraces, and pillars, their edges softened by centuries of coral growth. Local fishermen have whispered about this place for generations, calling it Pawan, a name that echoes their legends of a great kingdom swallowed by the sea as punishment for its arrogance. In 2005, divers mapping the seabed stumbled upon these eerie formations, their geometric precision unmistakably human-made. Carbon dating suggests they've rested underwater for at least 10,000 years, long before the pyramids of Egypt or the rise of Mesopotamia. But what's most chilling isn't just their age, it's how they fell. Layers of sediment reveal a violent end, crushed shells, jagged boulders piled like toys, and a thick stratum of sand shoved inland by unimaginable force. The fingerprints of a tsunami. Could Pawan be a relic of a lost advanced culture? Some researchers point to the structure's alignment with ancient solar cycles, hinting at sophisticated astronomical knowledge. Others note the precision-cut stones fitted without mortar, a technique seen in later megalithic sites like Göbekli Tepe. The local Sundanese people's oral histories add fuel to the fire. Their Pantun Gunung Padang poems describe a golden city atop a sacred mountain, cursed to sink beneath the waves when its rulers defied the gods. Geologists have found evidence of a catastrophic landslide off Java's coast around the same period, which could have triggered a mega tsunami capable of drowning coastal settlements in minutes. Yet the real revelation lies in how these ruins challenge our understanding of ancient engineering. The builders of Pawan didn't just stack stones, they adapted to the ocean's wrath. Some walls curve like breakwaters, while terraces step inland in a pattern that mirrors modern tsunami evacuation routes. It's as if they knew the sea's fury firsthand and built to withstand it. Compare this to Japan's tsunami stones or the raised foundations of Pacific Islander longhouses, a global pattern of coastal cultures engineering resilience into their very foundations. Now shift the lens to ancient Crete, where Minoan engineers designed palaces with tapered columns wider at the top than the base, to better sway during earthquakes. Or the Harappans of the Indus Valley, whose cities featured advanced drainage systems to mitigate flood damage. These weren't just feats of artistry, they were survival strategies forged in the crucible of disaster. The lesson is clear. Civilizations that thrived along volatile coastlines didn't just fear the ocean, they studied it, respected it, and ultimately outsmarted it. Until sometimes they didn't. Pawan's silent stones remind us that the sea's memory is long and its patience short. Every tsunami that reshapes our coasts is an echo of an older catastrophe, a cycle written in water and stone. And as divers still brush sand from those sunken walls, we're left to wonder what other blueprints of forgotten resilience lie buried beneath the waves. Ancient architects didn't just build cities, they waged war against the sea itself, crafting defenses so ingenious they border on prophecy. Take the Minoans, whose palaces on Crete stood for centuries despite sitting in one of the Mediterranean's most earthquake-prone zones. Their secret foundation stones carved with grooves, fitted together like puzzle pieces that could shift during tremors without collapsing. Walk through the ruins of Knossos, and you'll see walls rebuilt multiple times not from failure, but from a culture so accustomed to quakes, they engineered their structures to be easily repaired. Even their storied frescoes hint at an intimate knowledge of disaster. One depicts a fleet of ships dwarfed by curling waves, a possible warning passed down through art. Then there's Japan's medieval tsunami gates, stone barricades erected along vulnerable coasts as early as the 15th century. Villages like Enyoshi built them at precise elevations, calibrated to the height of past waves. These weren't crude walls, but sophisticated hydrological tools. Some featured angled sluices to dissipate water pressure, while others doubled as floodgates villagers could seal within minutes. The most effective ones worked in tandem with terraced farmlands uphill, creating staggered zones of defense. When the 1896 tsunami struck, towns behind intact gates suffered half the casualties of those without. Yet even these marvels had limits. In 2011, waves simply surged over some barriers, proving nature always writes its own rules. The Maya took a different approach, elevation as salvation. At Chilam, their coastal trading hub, they perched temples and watchtowers atop 40-foot cliffs, not just for prestige, but for survival. Archaeologists found saltwater stains on lower ruins, evidence of storm surges that never reached the elevated plazas where merchants traded jade and cocoa. Their canals, often praised for irrigation, served a dual purpose as shock absorbers, redirecting floodwaters away from granaries, but adaptation came at a cost. At the port of Cerros in Belize, silt deposits reveal a grim trade-off. As seawalls grew higher, fishing yields dropped. The very defenses that saved their cities may have starved their economies. Now consider the biblical city of Tel Dor on Israel's coast, where archaeologists uncovered a 6th century BCE warehouse with a floor paved entirely with shipped timbers. At first, it seemed like recycling until they noticed the wood grain all faced seaward, as if positioned to resist water pressure. The same layer held a trove of tsunami debris, smashed amphorae, fish bones mixed with deep sea coral, even a sailor's sandal wedged beneath a toppled column. Here, engineering met desperation. When the next wave came, those timbers held long enough for survivors to flee uphill, leaving behind a ghost town preserved in brine and sand. What unites these innovations isn't just ingenuity, it's humility. These civilizations understood that against the ocean's rage, victory wasn't about stopping the unstoppable, but outthinking it long enough to live another day. Their ruins whisper a lesson we're still learning. The difference between survival and oblivion might be a groove in a stone, a gate on a hill, or the wisdom to build higher when the waters rise. Now, let's turn to a city that ignored these warnings, a place where pride drowned beneath the waves. The legend of Sodom might hide a geological truth, one written in salt and sulfur. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah has echoed through millennia, a cautionary tale of cities obliterated by divine fire. But peel back the layers of myth, and you'll find geological whispers of something far more tangible. Near the Dead Sea, sediment cores reveal a startling anomaly, a thick layer of salt and sulfur abruptly sandwiched between ancient mud, dating to roughly 3700 BC. Nearby, archaeologists uncovered the ruins of Tall El Hammam, a Bronze Age city with walls toppled outward, its bricks scorched by temperatures exceeding 2000 degrees, far hotter than any ordinary fire. Some scientists point to a chilling explanation, a cosmic airburst like the Tunguska event of 1908, where a meteor exploded in the atmosphere with the force of a nuclear bomb. The blast wave alone could have flattened cities, while superheated debris ignited the infamous brimstone. But here's where the tsunami theory enters. The same sediment layers show traces of marine microfossils and chaotic debris flows, as if a colossal wave had surged inland from the Mediterranean, funneling through valleys to drown the Dead Sea shores. Satellite imagery even reveals what might be an ancient impact crater submerged off Sicily, a candidate for the culprit. If a meteor struck the Mediterranean, the resulting megatsunami could have sent walls of water rampaging across the coast, leaving behind salt-encrusted ruins ripe for moral allegory. The debate isn't just academic, it's a collision of science and scripture. Ancient texts like the Book of Jubilees describe the destruction as fire in the heavens, followed by the sea rising over the land, while Babylonian tablets recount a star that fell like a torch before floods consumed coastal cities. Even the location fits. Sodom's proposed sites sit on low-lying plains vulnerable to both cosmic impacts and tsunami surges. Could these stories be fractured memories of a real catastrophe, retold through the lens of divine judgment? Now shift the scene to the Roman Empire's twilight years, where another tsunami left an indelible mark. In 365 AD, the bustling port of Alexandria shuddered as the Mediterranean convulsed. Historian Ammianus Marcellinus wrote of quakes so violent they split open tombs, followed by a wave that rolled over islands and swept towns into the abyss. Modern scans of Egypt's coast confirm his account. Shipwrecks stranded miles inland, layers of sea sand burying Roman villas, even the ruins of the legendary pharaoh's lighthouse, once toppled by an earlier tsunami in 796 BC. The Crete earthquake that triggered this disaster was so powerful, it lifted the island 30 feet in seconds, a geological upheaval that sent waves racing as far as Spain and Malta. In Alexandria, the water didn't just flood, it stayed. Saltwater contamination ruined farmland for decades, hastening the empire's decline in a region already strained by political chaos. What began as a tectonic shudder became a historical pivot, proving that tsunamis don't just destroy cities, they can unravel civilizations. From Sodom's salt-crusted ruins to Alexandria's drowned streets, these stories share a common thread: the blurring of natural disaster and divine retribution. Whether fire from the sky or waves from the deep, the ancients saw cataclysm as a mirror held up to human folly. Today, science deciphers the fingerprints of these events, but the lesson remains the same. When the earth or sea rebels, it doesn't discriminate between the righteous and the wicked. It simply reminds us how small we are. The Mediterranean was supposed to be Rome's bathtub, a controlled, predictable expanse where trade routes thrived and legions marched. But on the morning of July 21st, 365, the sea reminded the empire who was truly in charge. The quake struck near Crete with such violence, witnesses claimed it felt like the gods were tearing the world apart. Entire towns slid into the water as the island lurched upward 30 feet in seconds, displacing trillions of gallons of seawater. By the time the wave reached Alexandria, it wasn't just water, it was a weapon. Ships anchored in the harbor were catapulted into the city's grand boulevards, their hulls smashing through marble columns as if they were twigs. The historian Ammianus Marcellinus, writing just years later, described scenes of surreal horror: fishermen's nets tangled in the upper branches of palm trees, the bloated corpses of camels floating miles inland, entire neighborhoods submerged under a churning soup of mud and debris. This wasn't merely a tragedy, it was a turning point. Alexandria's granaries, crucial for feeding Rome's eastern provinces, rotted under layers of salt water. Trade routes faltered as ports from Cyrene to Athens lay in ruins, and perhaps most devastatingly, the disaster exposed the empire's fragility at the very moment it was fracturing under political chaos and barbarian invasions. The tsunami of 365 didn't topple Rome alone, but it landed a blow the empire never fully recovered from, a humbling lesson in how quickly prosperity can drown. Today, the Mediterranean still simmers with the same geological tensions. In 2017, scientists mapping the Hellenic Trench, the fault line responsible for the 365 disaster, found it locked under immense pressure, capable of unleashing another megaquake at any moment. Computer models show a similar event now would send 20-foot waves slamming into coastal megacities from Istanbul to Tel Aviv within minutes. The difference. Today's shoreline is crammed with 20 million more people and trillions in infrastructure. Venice's flood barriers, Athens' waterfront high-rises, even the nuclear power plants along Turkey's coast, all sit in the crosshairs of history's repeating fury. But the Mediterranean isn't the only place where ancient disasters whisper warnings. For a tsunami's true ground zero, we must cross the globe to the Pacific's Ring of Fire, where the ocean doesn't just ripple, it roars. Off the coast of Japan, a submerged cliff holds the key to understanding waves that don't just reshape coastlines, but redefine civilizations. Chile's coastline is a geological time bomb, its history written in layers of sand and shattered shells. Beneath the modern cities and fishing villages lie the remnants of ancient tsunamis, each layer a frozen moment of catastrophe. The Mapuche people, indigenous to this land, have passed down stories for generations about the sea rising like a wall, tales so precise they align with sediment deposits dated to 1360 BC. These aren't just legends, they're oral history archives preserving memories of waves that reshaped the coast long before written records began. The proof is in the earth itself. Along Chile's shores, geologists have uncovered tsunami sands, layers of coarse marine sediment sandwiched between soil, some stretching miles inland. One site near Terua reveals at least 5 distinct tsunami deposits over the last 2,000 years, each separated by centuries of quiet. The most striking: a layer of crushed shells and ship timbers dated to 1575, matching Spanish colonial accounts of a quake so violent it triggered a wave that drowned settlers and Mapuche alike. But even that pales in comparison to what came later. 1960 changed everything. The Valdivia earthquake, a staggering 9.5 on the Richter scale, ripped open the seafloor for nearly 600 miles, sending a tsunami racing across the Pacific. In Hawaii, it smashed storefronts. In Japan, it drowned entire fishing fleets. Yet here's the unsettling truth. Geological cores suggest ancient quakes along this same fault were even more monstrous. Samples from coastal marshes show sand layers suggesting waves 60 feet high, twice the height of the 1960 tsunami. The math is sobering. If a quake like that struck today, the evacuation routes chalked onto Chilean sidewalks would be useless within minutes. What makes Chile's coast so vulnerable? It's all about the Nazca Plate sliding relentlessly beneath South America in a process called subduction. Normally, it inches forward smoothly, but when it snags, pressure builds until the Earth snaps like a broken spring. The resulting quakes don't just shake the ground, they warp the seafloor, displacing unimaginable volumes of water. Indigenous communities understood this cycle intuitively, building their villages on towering terraces. Modern Chile, though, has bet on concrete with mixed results. After the 2010 quake, new buildings stood firm, but tsunami warnings failed to reach coastal towns in time. Now shift your gaze across the Pacific to India's Gulf of Combat, where divers have stumbled upon something extraordinary: the outlines of a sprawling city beneath the waves. Stone foundations, pottery shards, even what appears to be a step temple, all resting 90 feet underwater. Carbon dating suggests these ruins could be 9,000 years old, predating the Indus Valley civilization by millennia. But what's truly chilling are the parallels to Chile's story. Sediment cores from the site show layers of marine debris, hinting at a catastrophic flood. Could this be the remains of a coastal metropolis swallowed by a mega-tsunami? Local folklore speaks of a kingdom called Dwarka, sunk beneath the waves as punishment for its arrogance, a tale eerily similar to the Mapuche's warnings. The lesson bridges continents. The sea never forgets where it's been. Whether in Chile's tsunami sands or India's drowned streets, the past whispers the same urgent question: not if the next disaster will come, but when. And as the Earth's plates keep grinding, the clock ticks louder. The legend of Dwarka reads like something from a myth, a glittering city of gold, home to the Hindu god Krishna, swallowed by the sea as punishment for his departure from this world. For centuries, scholars dismissed it as allegory, a poetic metaphor for impermanence. Then, in the 1980s, marine archaeologists probing the Gulf of Combat made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the academic world. Submerged stone walls, pottery shards, and even what appeared to be the foundation of a grand staircase lay scattered across the seabed, 60 feet beneath the waves. Carbon dating suggested these ruins were at least 3,500 years old, placing them squarely in the era when Krishna's Dwarka supposedly flourished. What's striking isn't just the age of these ruins, but how they fell. Sediment cores drilled from the site reveal a chaotic layer of sand, shell fragments, and broken bricks, all jumbled together as if churned by a colossal force. Geologists point to the telltale signs of a tsunami: boulders perched unnaturally inland, marine fossils mixed with human artifacts, and a distinct run-up layer showing how far the water surged. The timing aligns with a period of intense seismic activity along the Macron subduction zone, a fault line capable of triggering waves over 50 feet tall. Could Dwarka's demise have been not divine retribution, but geology in motion? The blur between myth and reality grows even stranger when you examine ancient texts. The Mahabharata describes Dwarka's collapse in eerie detail. The sea rose up like a mountain, swallowing the city whole, leaving not a trace behind. Another passage mentions the ocean roaring like 1,000 bulls, a description that mirrors modern tsunami survivors' accounts of the sound preceding the wave. Even the city's layout in the text circular, with radial streets, matches the underwater ruins configuration. Coincidence? Or could these stories be fractured memories of a real catastrophe, passed down through generations? Now consider the human cost. Dwarka wasn't just a spiritual hub, it was a thriving port, a nexus of trade between the Indus Valley and Mesopotamia. Its sudden destruction would have sent shockwaves through ancient economies. Archaeologists have found Mesopotamian clay tablets from the same era complaining of lost ships and vanished trading partners, while Indus Valley seals depict panicked figures fleeing waves. This wasn't just a local disaster, it was a global disruption, one that may have spurred mass migrations inland, away from vulnerable coasts. The lesson of Dwarka lingers like salt in the soil. When the sea claims a city, it doesn't just erase buildings, it rewrites history, turning facts into legends and survivors into storytellers. And as climate change nudges sea levels higher, those ancient warnings feel less like mythology and more like prophecy. The ruins of Dwarka aren't just relics of the past, they're a mirror held up to our own coastal cities, asking how long before the ocean decides to write the next chapter. From the submerged streets of Dwarka to the tsunami stones of Japan, one thread connects them all: the relentless movement of people fleeing the waves. When the water rises, cultures don't just scatter, they transform, carrying their trauma and ingenuity to new lands. The next time you see a crowded coastline, remember, every bustling port, every seaside village is built on the lessons and the bones of those who came before. When the sea rises with murderous intent, people don't just rebuild, they run. Across the Pacific, the Lapita people left behind a trail of pottery shards and abandoned villages, their sudden migrations etched into the archaeological record like scars. What drove these master navigators to flee coastal paradises? The answer may lie in layers of sand found beneath their former settlements, sediment deposits that match the calling cards of tsunamis. On islands like Vanuatu and Tonga, excavations reveal homes buried under marine debris, their hearths still filled with charcoal from final meals. These weren't leisurely relocations, they were desperate escapes from a shoreline that had turned traitor. The Lapita's flight wasn't just about survival, it reshaped an ocean. As they sailed ever eastward, their double-hulled canoes carried more than families and food, they transported entire cultures. Genetic studies show their DNA blooming across remote islands, while linguistic patterns trace their path like breadcrumbs, but this diaspora came at a cost. On Fiji's coast, archaeologists uncovered a grisly scene, a mass grave filled with skeletons bearing blunt force trauma, buried beneath tsunami debris. Were these the casualties of overcrowding as refugees poured into occupied lands, or evidence of resource wars sparked by vanishing fishing grounds? The waves didn't just move people, they ignited chain reactions of conflict and innovation. Now shift from the Pacific's blue expanse to a frozen moment in Scandinavia. In Norway's Alesund region, scientists drilling into fjord sediments hit something extraordinary: a layer of ocean floor fossils and ship splinters, all dated to 6100 BC. This was no ordinary storm deposit. The particles were too coarse, the distribution too widespread. Then came the clincher: wedge-shaped grooves carved into bedrock, identical to scars left by modern tsunamis. Piecing together the clues, researchers realized they'd found a snapshot of catastrophe. A submarine landslide had sent a 100-foot wave roaring up the fjord, drowning Stone Age fishing camps in minutes. What makes this discovery unique isn't just its age, it's the eerie preservation. Unlike tropical tsunamis that scatter remains, Norway's icy waters acted like a time capsule. One excavation uncovered a ring of stones where a hut once stood, its floor littered with half-finished bone tools and the remains of a gutted cod. The inhabitants had vanished, but their last moments were frozen in place, offering a hauntingly intimate glimpse of disaster. Even the wildlife bore witness. Reindeer antlers found wedged between boulders showed the wave's reach extended miles inland, reshaping ecosystems in its wake. From the Lapita's pan-Pacific exodus to Scandinavia's frozen tragedy, these events reveal a pattern as old as humanity itself. Disasters don't just destroy, they displace, pushing cultures into collision or collaboration. When the ocean speaks in tsunamis, civilizations don't just listen, they adapt, migrate, or perish. And sometimes, if the sediment is kind, they leave behind whispers for us to decipher. 8,200 years ago, the North Sea was a different world. Where waves now roll endlessly, there once stretched Doggerland, a vast, fertile plain linking Britain to mainland Europe, home to hunter-gatherers who roamed its forests and fished its rivers. Then came the roar. Off Norway's coast, an underwater avalanche the size of Iceland, known as the Storriga slide, sent 300 cubic miles of sediment crashing into the depths. The collapse triggered a tsunami unlike anything seen since. Waves as tall as 10-story buildings raced across the sea, swallowing Doggerland in hours. Today, fishermen trawling those waters still haul up surprises: flint tools, mammoth bones, even the occasional hearthstone, ghostly souvenirs of a drowned world. But the Storriga slide did more than erase a landscape. It may have rewritten human history. Archaeologists note a curious coincidence. Around the same time as the tsunami, Neolithic farming communities suddenly spread across Europe. Were Doggerland's survivors forced inland, carrying their knowledge to new lands? Sediment cores from the North Sea floor hold clues. Layers of sand and debris abruptly interrupt peat deposits, evidence of saltwater surges that turned freshwater marshes into brackish graveyards. Yet amid the destruction, there's resilience. At Helike in northeastern England, a settlement rebuilt after the waves suggests some adapted rather than fled, learning to harvest the sea's new bounty. The real mystery lies in what else might be down there. Sonar scans reveal river valleys and hills beneath the North Sea, a submerged world nicknamed Britain's Atlantis. In 2019, divers recovered a 6,000-year-old antler hammer from the seafloor near Norfolk, proof that Doggerland's story isn't just geological, but human. Could other lost landscapes await discovery? Off Australia's northwest coast, sonar has mapped ancient freshwater lakes drowned when seas rose after the last ice age. In the Persian Gulf, a once fertile plain called the Gulf Oasis may have hosted early migrations out of Africa before vanishing beneath the waves, which brings us to the pressing question: can we predict these ancient disasters? Modern scientists now read seabed sediment like tree rings, identifying layers left by past tsunamis. Off Chile, researchers have reconstructed a 10,000-year timeline of megawaves by analyzing deep sea cores. The pattern is unsettling. These events aren't random but cyclical. The real challenge lies in translating that knowledge into protection. Japan's tsunami stones, some 8 centuries old, prove that ancient solutions sometimes outlast modern ones. Meanwhile, artificial intelligence now scans satellite images for subtle seabed shifts that might hint at the next Storriga. The lesson of Doggerland isn't just about loss, it's about memory. The sea doesn't just erase, it archives, and as we sift through those submerged layers, we're not just uncovering the past, we're preparing for the next time the ocean decides to rewrite the map. The ocean never forgets. Beneath the waves, hidden in layers of sand and sediment, lie meticulous records of every catastrophic wave that has ever struck our shores, if you know how to read them. Scientists have become detectives of deep time, poring over these submerged archives to uncover patterns that could save countless lives today. Take Japan's tsunami calendars, painstakingly reconstructed from cedar tree rings and samurai diaries. These ancient logs reveal a chilling rhythm. Every 400 to 600 years, the Pacific rears up with particular fury, sending waves tall enough to drown castles. The last one, 1690, Do the math and the numbers hum with ominous possibility. But it's not just paper records that tell this story. Drill into the marshes of Oregon or the coral reefs of Sumatra, and you'll find nature's own ledger. In the Pacific Northwest, sediment cores show a layer cake of disaster, sandwiches of peat and soil interrupted by coarse, shell-laden bands, each marking a tsunami's passage. The intervals between these layers, roughly 300 to 500 years, the most recent, 324 years ago. Meanwhile, in the Indian Ocean, massive coral heads bear scars from being ripped from the seafloor and dashed against cliffs, their growth rings dating these injuries to recurring millennia apart catastrophes. The real breakthrough lies in connecting these dots. By cross-referencing sediment layers with underwater fault line maps, researchers can now pinpoint which quakes spawned which tsunamis and how often those faults snap. Japan's Nankai Trough, for instance, has a habit of unleashing magnitude 9 quakes every century or two, each one a potential tsunami trigger. But the scariest revelations come from ghost forests, stands of drowned trees still rooted along coasts from Washington to Chile. Their death rings all align with known mega-quakes, proving these events aren't isolated tragedies but chapters in a cycle written in salt water and stone. So what does this mean for us? In Crescent City, California, officials used sediment studies to revise evacuation zones after realizing past tsunamis reached twice as far as once thought. In Indonesia, villagers on Simulu Island credit ancestral stories passed down since the 1883 Krakatoa tsunami, with saving them in 2004. Their folklore contained precise instructions: run uphill at the first quake and don't look back. It worked so well their casualty count was 0, yet for every lesson heeded, there's a warning ignored. The Roman port of Leptis Magna built its lighthouse tall after a tsunami in the 1st century, only to see it toppled by another wave 200 years later. Today's high-rises in Tokyo and Los Angeles may face the same fate, their foundations laid over soil that liquefies when the earth shakes. The past doesn't just whisper, it roars. The question is whether we'll listen before the next wave turns our cities into tomorrow's sediment layers. Modern megacities glitter along coastlines like beads on a string, their skyscrapers and suburbs built atop landscapes that have known catastrophe for millennia. Tokyo's neon skyline sits directly above the colliding tectonic plates that spawned the Great Kanto earthquake of 1923, a disaster that killed 140,000 and birthed tsunamis that drowned entire towns. Los Angeles' palm-lined beaches face the Cascadia subduction zone, capable of quakes stronger than San Andreas and waves rivaling those that erased Native American coastal villages 3 centuries ago. And Istanbul, where 15 million people crowd the shores of the Sea of Marmara teeters on a fault line that could snap tomorrow, just as it did in 1506 when a tsunami slammed into the city's walls, drowning thousands in their sleep. What's changed isn't the threat but the scale. Ancient tsunamis struck villages, modern ones would engulf metropolises. Computer models simulating a repeat of the 1700 Cascadia quake show waves surging up Portland's Willamette River, flooding Seattle's underground transit tunnels, and swamping the runways of LAX within minutes. Japan's 2011 disaster proved even cutting-edge defenses have limits. The Fukushima seawall was designed for 19-foot waves, but the tsunami topped 50 feet, overwhelming backup generators and triggering meltdowns. Meanwhile, Istanbul's earthquake preparedness plans assume waves reaching 20 feet, yet geological evidence shows past tsunamis in the Marmara Sea climbed to 45. The real danger lies in complacency. After the Indian Ocean tsunami, nations invested in early warning systems, but maintenance lags. Thailand's buoy network fell into disrepair within years, leaving coastal resorts vulnerable. Chile's evacuation routes now end at privatized beaches blocked by luxury developments. And in California, tsunami zone maps haven't been updated since the 1990s, despite new research showing inundation could reach twice as far inland. Even Japan's famed preparedness faltered in 2011. Survivors reported ignoring alerts because past warnings had been false alarms, yet hope floats in unexpected places. In Indonesia, where oral traditions saved Saimulu Islanders in 2004, schools now teach tsunami folklore alongside evacuation drills. Alaska's coastal towns, built on lessons from the 1964 quake, position critical infrastructure on high ground, connected by elevated walkways. And in Lisbon, engineers have pioneered tsunami-proof parks, waterfront green spaces designed to absorb wave energy, their trees planted in shock-absorbing soil matrices. The past whispers through every modern seawall and siren. Disasters aren't anomalies, but inevitabilities. Whether etched in medieval stone or stored in supercomputer simulations, the message remains the same. The difference between tragedy and survival isn't just technology, but memory. When the next great wave comes, will we have listened? Ancient tsunamis don't just belong to history books, they're mirrors reflecting our own vulnerability back at us. Every shattered pottery shard, every salt-stained ruin, every drowned city whispers the same truth. Civilizations rise and fall, but the ocean's patience is eternal. What makes these disasters so haunting isn't just the scale of destruction, it's how quickly the ordinary becomes extraordinary. One moment, a merchant in Pavlopetri is haggling over copper ingots. The next, his world is underwater, his marketplace preserved like a fossil in sediment. These aren't just tragedies frozen in time, they're masterclasses in resilience. The Minoans rebuilt their palaces with earthquake-proof columns. Japan's ancestors carved warnings into stone. The Lapita people sailed thousands of miles to outrun the waves. Their lessons are coded in ruins and folklore, waiting for us to decipher. But here's the paradox: the same coasts that birthed these civilizations also buried them. Today, over 2.5 billion people live within 60 miles of a shoreline, more vulnerable than ever to the ocean's mood swings. Climate change cranks up the stakes, warming waters that fuel stronger storms and nudging sea levels higher. The difference: we have something our ancestors didn't, the power of hindsight. Sediment cores and satellite scans let us peer into the past, spotting patterns invisible to the naked eye. We know now that tsunamis aren't acts of gods, they're geology in motion, as predictable as the tides if you know where to look. So what do we do with this knowledge? Build higher for starters. Tokyo's floodgates and Venice's barriers are modern echoes of the Maya's cliffside temples. But hardware alone isn't enough. The real defense lies in memory, the kind etched into Japan's tsunami stones or woven into Pacific Islander chants. When the next big wave comes, survival might hinge on something as simple as a child remembering their grandmother's story about the day the sea stood up. That's why these sunken cities matter. They're not just archaeological curiosities. They're time capsules of human ingenuity and hubris. Dwarka's drowned spires and Doggerland's lost forests remind us that progress isn't a straight line, it's a spiral, looping back to the same challenges with each revolution. The question isn't whether the ocean will test us again, but whether we'll be ready when it does. Now it's your turn. Which lost city captures your imagination? The bustling streets of Rungholt, frozen in North Sea mud. The frescoed walls of Akrotiri, paused mid-celebration. Or maybe Helike, whose fate blurred into legend. Drop your pick in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into history's greatest mysteries. The past never really sinks, it just waits for us to dive deeper.